Good morning to everyone, and welcome to this session. We are talking about overcoming challenges, lessons from other sectors, but also not just other sectors, certainly from education and some of the other sectors that are related to education. I'm Elizabeth King. I'm the Global Director for Education at the World Bank, and I'd like to invite the panelists for this session to come to the stage, please. We have Mr. Jonathan Mitchell, who is the Chief Operating Officer of CARE. We have Mrs. Irene Ovonji Odida, who is a human rights lawyer from Uganda and works for ActionAid. And we have here Senator Cristóvão Buarque of Brazil. Welcome, panelists, and welcome to all of you. This session is divided into two parts. The first part is a debate among our panelists. And then afterwards, we will have a question and answer session. First from the participants from this room, from this auditorium, but also we're connected by online, very modern, very 21st century, through via MyWise and Twitter. And we will get questions also online, therefore. And so we will have questions from people who are connected to us, in addition from the participants here in the room. To ensure that your headsets work correctly, please do not place any items in front of the remote. Also, we have translation channels. So please, you have headsets with you. All right, so let me begin. We heard from this wonderful opening session we had earlier about the importance of innovation to addressing the challenges in education. But we also indeed heard from the panelists the importance of leaders and innovation leaders. And what we have on this panel are people who have been innovating in education. So I'm going to turn to each one of them, maybe first to say something just to warm them up, to say 2 sentences about themselves, to introduce themselves to you as innovators in education. I'm going to start with Mrs. Irene Ovonji Odida.
Thank you, Dr. King. My name is Irene Ovonji Odida, Miss Irene Ovonji Odida. I'm currently the chairperson of ActionAid International, and as has been introduced, I'm also a human rights lawyer from Uganda. My involvement in development work has been for a number of years, working on issues to do with trade justice, but also through ActionAid, which works on, its mission is to fight poverty and to promote development by fighting poverty. We work on education, health, particularly HIV/AIDS, women's rights, food security. And so it is through the work of ActionAid that I've been involved in issues to do with education.
Thank you very much. And Mr. Jonathan Mitchell.
Thank you, Dr. King. My name is Jonathan Mitchell. I've been working in international development and humanitarian assistance for the last 30 years in various parts of the world. I currently work for CARE International as Chief Operating Officer. CARE is an organization that has been focusing for over 60 years on international development and poverty alleviation. And certainly we have learned that when we're talking about leadership and innovation, it really is the leadership of the people, the communities, and the partners that we work with in countries around the world that is the most key to success.
Senator Buarque.
Good morning, each one. I have been a social entrepreneur in three ways. First, as a teacher, a professor is a social entrepreneur. We produce knowledge with our students. Second, I have been involved in NGO, one NGO, working with children in education. And third, I'm a politician also. As a politician in both executive branch and legislative branch, I have been involved executing some programs and proposing and implementing some laws regarding social affairs, especially education.
Thank you very much. When Senator Boarke introduced himself just now, but also to me earlier, he introduced himself as a social entrepreneur, which actually surprised me a little bit because he's from government, you know, but yet he's introduced himself as a social entrepreneur. So I would like to ask Ms. Ovonji Odida, does she consider herself to be a social entrepreneur in education in her job?
Thank you very much. Actually, I have some difficulties with the term, partly because I feel the challenge really is to understand what is the difficulty, what is the constraint affecting education or any other issue of development, and finding the solution to that is a process. So perhaps I don't quite put myself into a box, you know, and I think the terminology, but also part of the challenge for me, in addition to that, is that in dealing with issues of education, I feel there's a need to have an integrated approach that looks at the issue very holistically, and that sometimes by focusing on certain terminology, one may miss some of the aspects that go into solutions. From our perspective as an organization with ActionAid, our focus much more is around looking at issues from a rights-based perspective, which brings in the element of different sectors playing a role. The governments, the civil society, the private sector, and so on. So I would not want to categorize myself as a social entrepreneur, but rather say that I'm involved in mobilizing societies in civic action to achieve a particular goal in education.
Thank you. Now I'm going to make it a little bit harder for John Mitchell and ask him, do you feel that it's a box? By asking you if you are a social entrepreneur, am I boxing you in terms of categories?
I think it can be. I think using terms like this perhaps are useful in trying to synthesize some of our learnings so that we can understand from the different examples of the work that we are all involved in, you know, what are the key things that we can distill out. But I think the most important thing, though, is to keep focused on those real cases of where we've overcome challenges, working, as Irene said, with a variety of different players in overcoming challenges of development. And, you know, I think there are many ingredients to that. There's first of all, the need to really have a felt need that this is a key problem that a community is facing, whether it's education or another development challenge. It's not something that should be just imposed from above. It has to come from a real feeling of communities themselves. And then the passion and leadership that we often see is with people in their communities, leaders within their communities who have mobilized change. And NGOs and governments and so on are really, in some ways, the back players, if you like. We're supporting and mobilizing those processes, but the leadership often is coming very much from the communities and the people that we're working with.
Okay, so some of the terms we've heard from here are leadership, new ideas, involving communities, but my understanding of entrepreneurship also, thank you, is that it is about innovation, new ideas. Entrepreneurship, thank you so much, Senator. There are not many times when a senator will be able to pick up papers for me. So innovation, new ideas. Now, Senator Boarke, in government, which we know to be a place for bureaucracy and tradition and so forth, how can you be an innovator within a government institution, within, in particular in Brazil, a huge country, huge bureaucracy? How are you able to be an innovator?
I think that the first question is how to put state and private together in favor of public. I think there's a difference between public and state. Sometimes the state does not work for the public. And sometimes private people can work to the public. For example, in Brazil, there is a bank that has almost 40 schools, very good schools, public schools, free school, good school. It's public. Although they have a private owner. How to put together? I'll give an example. We had some time ago not so many children in Brazil in school. Or let's say the other way around. We had 20–30% of children out of school. It was possible to private groups to pay poor family to bring their children to school. The school by the government. We put together. After some time, the government took the idea and innovate. Today in Brazil, we have 12 million families receiving an allowance with the condition that the children, they have to be in school and they cannot miss the classes. This is a kind of cooperation, this is innovation. The cooperation per se is an innovation. And it's an innovation by the government to pay families to put their children in school. There is another closer to that, to put some amount of money in a saving account under the condition that the child will be promoted from 1 year to the other. The child cannot touch the money if he or she finishes high school. This is an innovation.
These are two programs that the senator was talking about. One is called Bolsa Escola, very well known and also evaluated. And the other one is Poupança Escola from Brazil. But the question I have for John Mitchell here is that when in the work that you've been doing in under CARE or as part of CARE, have you actually been able to find government officials who are willing to pick up innovations, new ideas, pilots, and then incorporate them into the actual programs of government?
Yes, I'll give one example. In Egypt, CARE has had a large involvement in the education sector for several years, and we found working, as we were trying to support the education sector in Egypt and working with rural schools, that one of the key constraints was that girls were not being allowed into the schools because they didn't have birth certificates. And so we worked with the communities that were involved in those schools and jointly went to the local authorities and talked about this problem. And it was really, and the local authorities were very much supportive in terms of addressing this problem and enabling girls to get birth certificates so they could continue their education. And just you know, those small sorts of things sometimes, they may seem small, but actually that was a real enabling factor to freeing up the access to education for girls in that part of Egypt.
I've actually visited one of your centers and talked to some of the women who were benefiting from that program. So thank you very much for that. Irene, if I might address you as Irene. So when governments have actually picked up some of the projects that you have in ActionAid, does the character of the program change when the government has become involved in these innovations?
Thank you, Elizabeth. The advantage, maybe just to start off with that, the advantage of working in partnership with governments is that, as illustrated by John, governments are able to build up these programs to a higher scale than civil society or even the private sector may do because of the public resources that they have at their disposal. So yes, there is an advantage in working with governments because you can get the scale, you can get many more children, many more schools reached by these kind of programs. As to the character and the impact that this may have on the programs and whether they become less innovative, I think it very much depends on the process of engagement with governments. Quite often, what we have found in our experience with ActionAid is that governments, particularly at a local government level, are quite interested in learning new ways of becoming more efficient, but lack the capacity. And in some cases also lack the resources, because in many countries we find that while we have decentralization of responsibilities, there isn't always sufficient decentralization of resources, of financial resources to the lower levels. So this creates constraints for governments at a local level. Now, what civil society can do, and probably private sector actors can do as well, is to build up the capacity of governments and then at the same time build up on the demand side. So working with the local communities, with the parents, with the teachers associations or teachers unions to build up the demand side and ensure that we can hold the governments then to account. Yeah.
John, would you like to answer that question too?
Yeah, I'd just like to add a little bit. I agree with everything that Irene has said. And I think one of the keys also is to ensure that it's not just the government that continues to focus on education. So for example, continuing to promote the idea of parent and community involvement in schools. So even though governments can take over a program, it's essential that there is that, if you like, counterbalance, that engagement and that ownership of communities in school programs. And, you know, again, another example from CARE's experience, we've been working with community schools in Afghanistan. And, you know, that's a context where there's, as we all know, there's a lot of unrest and violence. And schools that were just sort of built top down by government or various other actors in that context were often the ones that were most attacked by violent groups, whereas those schools where there was real community engagement in the development of the school, in the management of the school, those schools have continued and been successful. So I think that, you know, counterbalancing government with the involvement of communities in particular is essential.
Senator, you told me that you used to have an NGO which had, I guess, the seeds of Bolsa Escola, but that as the government picked it up, the NGO has become smaller. Did Bolsa Escola start with a different idea than what it has become?
That's a very good question. And thanks to it, I can put together teacher, politician, and NGO person. The idea of it, to pay per family to have their children in school, it started when I was the rector of the University of Brasilia. And we had a group to think about the future of Brazil. We took the problems we have ahead and we looked to solutions. One was children out of school. Then I had the idea, why not to pay to them? The same way we pay to someone already engineer to have a PhD in engineering. That was the idea as a teacher. After that, I was the governor of federal district, is a state in Brazil, and I implemented it as a politician. Just after, it's a very small state, just after finishing my mandate, I created an NGO, Child Mission, and I started around the world in Brazil. World Bank financed, UNESCO financed, UNICEF financed my travel around. And the president took the idea and implemented in Brazil for 4 million families. The following president took the same idea and implemented to 12 million. This is a way of cooperation. But I want to make another kind of cooperation, micro cooperation. from government to private people. One state government in Brazil had a very good idea. The governor said, we have problems in the school. Please adopt one school. He said to businessmen, businesswomen, he said to private person, I personally adopted one school. What do you do? What do you do with that? We go to the school, we look around, what's missing the school? And we finance that. We finance building, not the whole building, but some special aspect of building. Equipment, like computers. That's a very good cooperation between government and the private sector.
Thank you very much. Now, ladies and gentlemen, we know that education outcomes are affected not only by education policies or education programs. And in fact, our panelists are also working on other sectors besides education. So, for example, ActionAid is also active in, I believe, health, and CARE is active also in water and sanitation, the supply of safe drinking water. So I'm going to ask our panelists also whether the same kinds of things that they've found for education, the same kind of take-up of communities and the importance of some buy-in from communities has actually worked for those sectors. Let me start with you, Irene.
Yes, I think at the end of the day, what we're looking at here really is development. And, borrowing lessons from other sectors, what we have learned over time is that one needs to have a very integrated approach and to recognize that achieving progress in education means one has to have a holistic way of looking at it and looking at a whole range of factors that impact on education. The environment within schools, the environment in homes, the situation in the country, the governance level, and so on. All of these have an impact on education. So in the other sectors that ActionAid works in issues of women's rights, of HIV/AIDS, and issues to do with livelihoods and so on, we find that that is the case. The other lesson that we have learned that one could apply is the importance of having legal frameworks, of having a clear framework and a standard that one can then work towards and against one which can measure progress and hold governments and other actors to account. So in countries like Brazil, again, I think there are examples of Brazil where legal frameworks have been established that require a minimum investment from the state in this sector. These are some of the things that can help to achieve progress in education. And maybe the last thing that I want to talk about lessons from other sectors, is about the role of women. I think a key lesson for us, and this was mentioned in the panel earlier on today as well, is the importance of looking at the contribution that women can make to achieve targets in education. Mothers, for example, have a clear role in that. And then looking at education from a rights perspective, to recognize that there are clear gender disparities in most countries, and that any program that is trying to improve on quality of education and access to education must also look at the female school children.
Thank you very much. John?
Yes, we do work across a range of sectors, and I'll give a couple of examples from the economic development, the microfinance sector, where I think we've learned a lot. But like ActionAid Care believes also in looking at the underlying issues, the long-term needs to address problems. This is not, we can't fix these sorts of issues with very short-term things. You need to really dig down deep and understand the underlying causes of poverty, and then work with, which does require an integrated approach, and which does require working with a number of different partners in those sorts of programs. But in the microfinance area, just a couple of examples. One in Bangladesh, where we've had a large-scale program there working with economic development, where we saw the need for marginalized groups in the Bangladesh context to be able to find opportunities in rural sales programs, in selling goods in rural areas. And what we've found interesting there is that, you know, we can pilot that, we can learn from those pilots, which are often led and initiated by women's leaders themselves. But as they grow, you start to see interests of other partners. So, for example, now we're working with Danone, which is in the private sector, that is also interested, obviously, in outreach for its products in rural areas. And so, being able to pull together in a convergent way different partners in addressing some of these longer-term issues where there are convergent interests is a really important aspect of this.
Thank you. Senator, you are also a proponent of health programs. Can you tell us a little bit about how you come to that?
Yes, I have been working very much in health because I think that there is no problem in income inequality. That's not a problem. But there is a moral problem in inequality on education and inequality on health. We cannot afford to have inequality of the access to education and the access to health. Then we have been working a lot. And what I have been doing there as governor, as professor, as NGO person, is to promote the idea of health care at home, to finance small groups of professionals. Sometimes we have no doctor, but professional in a very small group, and they go to the home to see how it's working, the health of the family. This is a very, very cheap program that any NGO can do. Perhaps not for thousands of persons, but for some hundreds or dozens of people. But I want to talk about another program that I think is very interesting. A businessman, he alone created 101 libraries, public libraries. He brings money, he brings books directly, because book most people use to throw away, to give to others. And he built a small building in there, and he paid for some librarian. Listen, 100 libraries is a lot. Just one person, sure, he's a rich man. But it's possible to have this kind of cooperation. It's a public library. It's not a private library, but with private money.
Thank you very much. But I want to point to one aspect of the innovations of these individuals, but also of their organizations, which is really the power of bringing together family demands and family desires and goals, the community support for those goals, and also then government, and the fact that government can scale up and government can support. And sometimes I think we come from, in terms of you know, improving education outcomes or improving, let's say, water, the supply of water, access to water and sanitation and all of these other social goals, we tend to think that it's mainly government that's going to fix this. What I think this panel is saying is, in fact, seeds of new ideas and also of better ways of doing some things can really come from organizations, individuals. Sometimes just as for example, our winner, the first winner of the Weiss Prize is an individual with an idea, willing to make a sacrifice, willing to sell his apartment in London to actually fund, you know, BRAC for the first time. And I think that's one thing that we see here is using the power of individuals and organizations, not necessarily in government, realizing the importance of harnessing the desires of families and their goals, and the power of the community, and then the support of government afterwards. I would like to actually turn to our second part, which is, first you can ask each other questions, or if there are hands in the audience here, for questions, and then we will also, I'll find out if we also have questions via Twitter. So please, there are microphones, or they will come to you. We have a hand here and a hand there, 2 hands there. Please, and introduce yourself to the audience. Give us your name and what organization or government you come from. Thank you.
Ahmed Al-Hamadi, I'm from Ahmed Al-Hamadi, I'm from Abu Dhabi Education Council, from United Arab Emirates. It's really my pleasure to attend this session, and I believe myself of well experienced and well educated, and people who had a long experience and different experience in education, in government, private sectors, joining them together. My question is more into how do we really convince the private sectors in increasing their donation to education. And even sometimes we're finding ourselves, I would say sorely, to say that, we need to even to convince sometimes the government to increase their donations in education and to increase their support in education. As Ms. King said, the demands of the family, if we define these, maybe then we can better shape our education to reach these demands. But I would say, if we really define the demands of the private sectors and the demands of the government sectors and the family demands as well, this might, convince them in a way to increase their donation and support to the education. But my question is, from your experience, can you tell us some innovative ideas, on how we can reach this goal, on how we can grab them more to support the education sector?
Okay, this is harnessing the power of the private sector is really the question. If you don't mind, let me take a couple of questions and then we can think about. Yes, please. Is that Sheila? Yes, Sheila Sisulu.
Yes.
Please.
My name is Sheila Sisulu from the World Food Programme. Irene, you talked about, you're the only one who talked about food security. I just wonder, in your experience, what you found the link being between household food insecurity and education outcomes. Is there a link, and if there is, what is it? From the Senator. Senator Brazil has been very innovative in the area of school feeding. Have you found that your innovation, the innovations of government and the private sector and farmers, linking all of those together has contributed to better outcomes?
One more question. There was another hand there earlier. Maybe I missed. So, yes, please. And then we'll go to the panelists.
Good morning. My name is Adla Sabri. I am principal of a private school for learning difficulty and slow learners. My question for the Senator is that keeping students attending school till they finish the high school is the biggest challenge for many countries. And you have mentioned something about saving accounts that will not be touched until he finished the high school. And I think this may be, I want to ask who is putting this saving accounts? Is it the government or parents or guardians? Thank you.
Great. So, Irene, you go first, and then we'll go through the panelists.
Yes, thank you very much. The two questions. I'll start with the one about food, the impact of food insecurity and I think livelihoods really of households on access to education. There is no doubt that there is a connection because kids, young people who are hungry cannot study, for starters. And also the level of poverty in a family will have an impact on the ability of the kids to access school at all. So there is a direct link between the livelihoods of families, the well-being of families, and the food issue at home, and the impact on education. So it's important to have programs and for governments to take up programs that address that as well. And of course, that then brings in the issue of financing. I think once again, a good example is in Brazil, where some years ago, I visited some programs in Bahia, which is one of the poorest states in Brazil, where there are programs to provide food for children to enable them to come to school. Earlier on, when we were talking with the senator, he talked about some of the challenges around that, where there is a need to look not just at having food so that the children can come into school and concentrate on their studies, but also to ensure that the quality of the schools themselves is high, so that the kids come and stay for the learning as well. So there definitely is a correlation between poverty, income, livelihoods, food, and education. It's a whole integrated thing. I'd link that to the second question that was asked about lobbying governments to make decisions, and also private sector to provide support. I think one of the core challenges for the education sector is financing. There is no doubt about that. Financing, what percentage of the national budget goes into education, and how much of that actually reaches into the schools. So there's a whole host of issues that one has to look at, from the allocation at the national level to ensuring that the funds that are allocated actually reach the end users, to the schools and to the children. I think the advantage of the success of advocacy around that is to ensure that both governments and the private sector see the clear win in prioritizing education. So the case has to be made to establish the close relationship between success in education, behind access and quality of education, and the interests of policymakers, whether it's in economic development or the interests of the private sector to have a skilled labor force. And what we have found in ActionAid is that we have to do a lot of work around research and documentation. Research to show the link, and documentation to prove it, and then to make that case to policymakers and to the private sector. The question that was raised about innovation and how that can be brought into the sector, what I have to say is that there is no magic bullet. It's a process. I think John said this. It is a process. It's a process of investment, a process of building up capacities, of researching to establish what works, and then convincing those who have the power to create change, either to provide finances or other resources for them to make the right decision. And for this to work, you do need the involvement of key stakeholders, like the schools themselves, school management committees, of parents, of teachers' associations, as the direct beneficiaries of those who have a direct stake, so that they apply pressure to the government and also to private sector. Thank you.
Thank you, Irene. John?
Yes, just to add a few points. I think what Irene talked about in terms of making the case is absolutely clear. And I think, all of us here are obviously people who understand the importance of education. But we know there are many people out there, private sector, government, and elsewhere, who may not understand that. And it is a case, it's a very compelling case. The private sector wants a market. It wants to be able to sell its product, its services, whatever that might be. We all know that that is something that will not happen without investment in education over time. So really trying to make that case, that business case, if you like, that investing in a long-term education will have a huge payoff for the private sector, for the government, and will pay back. And I think the other thing is this idea of convening different actors together. If we can convene the private sector and government and NGOs and communities together, and find out what are the shared interests and goals, and there normally are, and find out what those are, and then you can begin to see a role for private sector and government and others to work together. And private sector engagement doesn't have to be donation. It can also be how can we work together to achieve those common interests in other more innovative ways. So I think moving beyond some of the traditional relationships, donor to recipient perhaps is also important. And on the question of food security, CARE also is involved very much in food security work around the world. I just came back from Somalia, where, as you know, there's a food crisis, and you have displaced people in that context that certainly have no access to education, but are dealing with very, very basic issues around food and water and shelter. But still, that longer term, again, the solution is that people understand the need for peace, the need to work together, and food security. We can provide food that helps families survive and get through those sorts of crises. But also people who are educated understand the need for food and livelihood security. So it's a two-way relationship, I think, in that context.
Right. Now, before I give the mic to the senator, I just want to say that Sheila Sisulu is more modest about describing, what I think what she could be asking. The World Food Programme has been innovating as well, changing its model of change through feeding, through the nutrition and feeding, school feeding programs, and involving communities much more, and involving even the sort of the local private sectors. So the World Food Programme is an innovator as well as in this field. Senator, about Tupansa Escola.
Yeah, 3 questions. I'll start for the last one. Who pays for that? The saving school. If we want that for the whole children in Brazil, it has to be the federal government, because we have 50 million children. If we put just $50 by the end of the year, it would be $2.5 billion. But we can start with 1 child. Personally, we can do. We just need $500. Two children, $1,000. I put through my NGO a bank who paid 300 children the saving account. It worked very well, even because the bank keeps the money. It's in a saving account. The bank has not to pay the money, just at the end of the high school. And this brings me to the first question, how to convince people. I think that we have to make some steps. One is to try in a small scale. 1, 2, 3, 4 families, and to show, listen, it works. Second, anyone likes very much what they learned through the media. If you have one of these programs, and if you have a news about the program, be sure that a lot of people come to help. I remember very well that Bolsa Escola, that means school scholarship to pay per family to have the children in school, the other politicians, they didn't care about. Up to the day, Time magazine made a news about that. December 1995. After these days, everybody looked around to see what's that, how to do the same. I was doing for 1 year. And third, advocacy. You have to make a lot of advocacy. I want to profit of that to say, WISE should advocate a kind of a global program for education in the world. We had the Marshall Plan for industrial recuperation of Europe. We can have a Doha program or WISE program, globally speaking. And finally, the third question, the outcome of all this program. From the point of view of bringing children to school, it's a wonder successful. We have almost all children in school today, every one of them, almost. But from the point of view of quality, we did not improve very much. we are going, but you are keeping behind for two reasons. First of all, other countries are doing better. And second, and more important, education is each day more exigent. Can I say that? Is that in English? We need, each day we need more education. Even when we improve less than reality require. Then I would say that regarding quality, we are staying behind the requirement of a modern world from the point of view of innovation in school and innovation from school to society. Because innovation has the two, we have to innovate classrooms. We have to abolish blackboard. We have to put, instead of blackboards, we have to put smart boards. Children does not believe in the teacher. He believes in the computer. Then we have to modernize classroom, and through that, modernize society also.
Thank you, Senator. Any more questions here? Yes, please. And then you, please introduce yourself.
Yeah, my name is Brij Kothari from the Indian Institute of Management in India, and I work in mass literacy through television. My observation first is that almost all innovations are somehow intersectoral. That's what makes them innovative. Governments tend to operate in silos. Health ministry, education ministry, any other ministry. And my question to all the panelists is, how do you build in this intersectorality within the government so that innovations are then handled interministerially?
Hard question. Yes, please. You had a question there. Yes. And then you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm Eva Leinonen. I'm Vice Principal for Education at King's College, University of London. I've been just thinking about the sort of challenges that we have in the so-called developed world around access to education. And of course, you're talking about some very basic type of education. You're talking about primary education, secondary education. My particular challenge as a vice principal of a large university is that how do we enable access to higher education in the developed world, like United Kingdom, when there are real barriers? And what could we actually learn from the work that you do at the level of primary and secondary education? So the sort of challenges we have, for instance, in the United Kingdom, is that we have very disadvantaged families and young people. Yes, they go to primary education and they go to secondary education, but then the step to a university is a very large one. And I'm really thinking, and I'm very inspired by what you say, in the sense that I think we could learn in the so-called developed nations much more from the work that you're doing. And it very much is about what the speaker on the right said, around social and psychological constructs of people and families that we need to work on. So I just wondered whether you had any comment around the sort of challenges that I would have in the work that I do. Thank you.
Thanks for the question. And this gentleman here on the third row.
Thank you. Stephen Harris from the Sydney Centre for Innovation and Learning. Question related to the one over here. I guess the challenge, not just the sectoral silos within government, but also how do you engage government into interest when it's not their policy in the first place? What's the best advice there? You know, so that quite often governments act from their own agenda and from their own party platform, and it's so hard to find that little wedge in. So I guess it's piggybacking on the other question. Thank you.
So how do we force government? How do we use your programs, your initiatives to force governments to actually work across sectors. And we'll get it from the NGO side before we go to the government side here. And another question, which is on the access to higher education. And what are some of the lessons from your experiences?
Okay. In terms of intersectoral, I think, there's always tensions within governments and other agencies as well between, the geographic way of organizing and the technical way of organizing. And I think, that's always a constant balancing that's going on. So if you have the regional or the district authority, working with them actually is a way to look at issues in an intersectoral way, because they're much more interested in the development of their district or their region. And they often have good mechanisms to do that, and they're not just stuck in one sector. So I think that's one way to encourage governments or to work with governments in a way that's cross-sectoral, is to look at those entities that within government that are actually responsible in that way, such as regional or district authorities, and trying to strengthen them and support their sort of deeper analysis of what the issues are in a particular area that they're responsible for. In terms of barriers to higher education, I don't pretend to have much to offer there, but I think just a couple of thoughts. One is often the barrier is something quite simple, and sometimes, so rather than always looking for the very sophisticated problem, sometimes the barrier is simple, and if you can identify that, you can do something quite simple to address it. And I'll give one example from rural schools in Tanzania, where they had toilets, but only one. And so girls were not attending those schools because there were no separate toilets for the girls. Very simple thing, and had to do obviously with understanding the culture and society in that context. So if you can build separate toilets for the girls, that barrier is overcome and access can increase. So sometimes looking for those simple barriers and trying to overcome them. Secondly, I think this idea that, in international development now, this increasing partnership across different sectors, so government and private sector and so on. And again, I don't, as I said, I don't pretend to understand what the barriers are to higher education in a developed country context like the UK, but economic barriers, I would assume, are part of that, and how, again, the private sector can be involved in helping to contribute to overcome some of those barriers.
Thank you. Irene?
Very interesting questions. I think there's a lot to discuss. I'll start with the one about the silos. Sad to say, I don't think the silos and working in silos only affects governments. I think you find in any large organization that there is that kind of tendency to focus inwards. So maybe it's something to do with the way the human beings think. But certainly, as you've said, dealing with the issues in education requires an integrated approach, and there are many different aspects to it that would not only be resolved within, say, the education ministry itself or in that sector. What we have found in ActionAid is that we have to look at it as a development issue. And so the approach that we take in working with governments is to try to align or to enter through the National Development Program approach. So as governments are working on developing their national development plans, we therefore try to engage, and not just as an individual organization, but working in coalition with other actors in civil society and other stakeholders at a national level to engage with government ministries that are involved in formulating the national development plans, so that these issues can be built into that and can therefore influence across government and not only be linked to one sector. The other thing also is just having consultation and continuous dialogue with the officials in the government ministries and the relevant ministries, and make them much more aware about the multifaceted nature of the situation. So it's a continuous thing of engagement. The other thing that I could talk about relating to access to higher education, certainly the challenges that are faced by disadvantaged children, disadvantaged students, may seem to be different on the face of it in different parts of the world, but often when one gets to the gist of it, you'll find that the challenges are quite similar. I think as John has tried to allude to that, the issues that create exclusion, they may be economic, they may be psychological, they may be social. So the important thing is to understand that and to see the link between the access and the performance in school and the environment outside of the school. One of the learnings which I mentioned earlier for us in ActionAid is that there is need to engage with the families where the students come from and to engage with the communities so that there is support that is given to them and there is a recognition of the importance and the value of education so that you have that support coming from the family as well. Besides this, you'll find that the other thing we found is that there may be barriers related to access. It might be things like just physical infrastructure, physical access. That might not be the case in the UK, but it may be important to find out what other issues are there that are creating the barriers besides the family environment itself. There are some programs that have been done in Uganda, for example, where I'm from, which relate to building role models, developing mentoring programs so that children who are coming from disadvantaged backgrounds are able to have people who provide support, who can actually help them to survive and to thrive in the school environment. So these are some of the supportive mechanisms that one can draw on to help children coming from disadvantaged backgrounds. And I imagine it would translate into higher education as well. Yeah.
So thank you very much. We have only a little bit of time left. So I'm going to go to the senator and ask him precisely just one question, which is on the silos question. Can government work cross-sectorally?
Yes. The three questions, two of them I have one answer. We have to innovate politics. We do not have to innovate only education. We do politics almost the same way as in ancient Greece, in the classical world. Politicians look for votes, not for solutions. The solutions is the way to have votes. And each one looking for votes is kept in his area. The Ministry of Education does not discuss the solution with the Ministry of Health because they are looking for votes. How to educate politicians? Through a new generation of politicians. How to do that? Innovating education. And wait for a new generation. Even a generation of politicians with a global feeling and not only local feeling. Looking to the new generations and not to the new election, singular, just one. And finally, about the university, we have to talk and to do long-life education. Long life education. And to say that the word is not university and nothing. We have to create some area after high school, before university, parallel to university, that most of the students that is going to university can go and can be happier than at the university.
As the last point, I just want to ask the panelists just a couple of lines, not more than 2 seconds. What should WISE be doing, do you think, in education? Which actually the senator started to say, he started to mention something like a la Marshall Plan. So I'm going to start with the senator just to say a couple more words about that before I go to the other speakers.
We have more than 1,000 leaders of the world. We have 120 countries. We have to cry to the world. Say we need a global plan to put every children, everywhere at school, in the good schools. That's possible. It does not cost more than the Marshall Plan cost. That's possible. And perhaps Doha is the place to cry.
That's a real challenge. Thank you, Senator.
I think, first of all, I think it's a wonderful forum for learning, for all of us, for learning from each other, from the different experiences. And that in itself, I think, is a very powerful thing that WISE is doing. But I agree with the Senator. We need to take that learning and we need to use the collective power that we all have to then say something more than that at the global level.
Thank you, Irene.
Thank you. In addition to that, this is a platform that brings people together. I think we can learn from communities. Let's see how to make education relevant to communities, something that can directly translate into better lives for the communities and particularly for those who are disadvantaged, and continue to champion education because not many people are doing it through promoting resourcing of education and building up capacity of those who provide education, like the teachers.
Thank you very much. One lesson from me about this, this is about social entrepreneurship, about the importance of innovation in education and other sectors. There was one thing that came out from this discussion which I'd like to highlight, which is everyone was talking a little bit about learning from those innovations. I think, John, you said it the strongest, that when you pilot, you have to have to be an advocate, you have to actually measure whether things worked. You have, and the lessons from that is the message that can go out. Every one of you actually had said something like that. And I think that is, as we think about the importance of this forum, we exchange ideas, the new ideas. But I think next time we come here, it would be good to actually bring evidence from the field about what worked, what didn't work, and why. And I think that is something that we can think of as we come to this forum every year, is what did social entrepreneurship, what did the innovation produce in our communities and in our countries. So with that, I heard there are no questions on Twitter. Thank you so much for coming. I have a couple of announcements. So first of all, by the way, let's give our panelists a big hand. Thank you very much. So there is an open program during the lunch break. There are WISE debates and WISE focus sessions in the auditoriums and in the WISE Majlis. Is that right? How to pronounce the demos and other activities in 5 areas of the WISE Majlis. And then there are also workshops and meeting rooms. And among today's highlights, there's a speed networking session area from 1:15 to 2:45. And there's also WISE Focus and WISE Awards at session 1.4. And the winners are going to be at the WISE Majli area in area 2. So I don't know if this makes sense to you. There are a lot of things that are going on, and I think they're up there on the board. I think that's simply the message. Please watch out for all the things that are going on. Thank you so much.